STEMology, the Young Scientist Survival Guide, Session 18. Hello, I'm glad that you all came to listen to episode 18 of STEMology. My name's Alina Adams, and I'm here with Holden Joynes.
Hello everybody, how are we doing today?
Thank you for joining us. Do you hear that? Joynes joining us.
Joynes? Oh, wonderful. Great joke. Love
awesome.
it.
You know, I really tried.
Yeah.
But I have Holden here, and we are super excited to release our second episode here doing research basics.
Yes, I was here on episode 10, then we got to talk a lot about, like how you find a research paper, what are you looking for, all that kind of stuff, and I'm excited to be back.
Awesome. Well, always glad to have you.
Yes.
And so for this episode, we're pretty excited because we're going to move on to step 2. And so step 2 is going to be a little more about what constitutes a research paper, the different aspects of it, the different sections in a research paper, and why they're important.
Yeah, before we even get into that though, can I just point out that the last time we recorded, we had to fit it into both of our busy schedules because of the MCAT. And now, you texted me 2 days ago that you wanted to record this, and we're already doing it because we have nothing to do.
Yeah, I remember thinking, okay, the biggest battle of the year. Don't know if of the year.
No,
it's been a crazy year.
Yeah, it's been pretty bad.
The biggest battle of my academic career was taking the MCAT, right? And so now that that's over, we're kind of oh, welcome to the world.
Yeah, like people have been complaining about having nothing to do in quarantine. I get it now. Because
I didn't understand until recently.
It's until right now.
Yeah, so learned how to, you said you've been baking bread.
I made bread.
Yeah.
I made some
what types
actual
of bread.
I did a rye. You already told me that if I said sourdough you'd get mad at me, but I did make a sourdough.
Okay, that's fun. All over the internet. People just, perfecting their sourdough.
It's like a trend now, but I've been doing it for a while.
But now I'm also kind of sad because I didn't get any bread.
Oh,
Holden.
Sorry.
That's okay, that's okay. You've been busy. Yeah. You just finished your med school applications, right?
Yes, finally. Med school application is in, and I've already gotten some secondaries back, which I'm very excited about.
I'm proud of you. I started going to the gym again.
Yes. I saw you went to Florida, too. You were there for a week.
Yeah, no, it was a great trip. It was definitely necessary. I felt all the pressure in the world, with everything school-related, socially, right?
Finally got to be around some people for once?
No, I'm talking about systemic racism that America's finally waking up to.
Ah, nice. That is good. That is really good.
So, that's
we like that, too.
It's been an emotional roller coaster on that front, and then my roommate just recently moved out.
Ah, yes.
Basically, summer 2020 has been wild, and now we have to prepare to go back to school in 3 weeks.
Oh, I know. I'm
back to school tentatively because it's our laptop at home.
Yeah. So. I don't know if you call that back to school or just more of the same.
We're taking classes.
We're taking classes. We have some due dates.
We have to email professors and stuff.
But I will say, I really, really miss the community that college brings, I will say.
I do. I miss having, my friends. I miss seeing everybody. I miss walking on campus.
I miss spending 24 hours at the library and then just being there whenever they close down. All right, you gotta
the librarians kind of tapping their foot, looking at their watches, what time it is, and you're still studying.
And it's ready to go.
Yeah, it's time for you to get out.
Yeah.
Well, as much as I miss campus, we're probably gonna have to wait a little longer until we can enjoy.
Yeah, that's okay. It's what needs to be done.
You know what? I'm on my 9th semester, so I think I've had enough of
You're
school
ready?
at this
You're
point.
Ready? You're hey, if I can stay home and go to school, perfect.
Yeah, I really won't be upset. Moving on here.
Moving on. So, like we kind of said earlier, back in episode 10, we talked about the things that we really, really want to look at before we get into a research paper. And so this episode, we want to talk more about the research paper itself.
Yeah, so the different aspects that you're going to find. But honestly, let's just acknowledge real quick that research papers and reading them and understanding them is very difficult. So,
super difficult.
Yeah, don't feel discouraged if it takes you a couple tries or you have to try different methods or ask for help. All of that is very normal.
We believe in you.
Yeah, so there are a few different methods that I use when I'm struggling to understand. So when I have any unknowns that I encounter right away, I just make a note of them, or immediately I just go on and Google them right then and there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like we kind of said in the last episode, that you have a lot of resources at your fingertips. You have Google, you have textbooks, you have your professors, you have other people.
And those librarians that foot tap.
Yes, that they really want you to get out. Sometimes you can talk to them too.
Yeah, they're your allies.
Yes.
And if you really are hurting for some background information and you're looking up articles on a subject that is very foreign to you, maybe just read a textbook chapter real quick, get your bearings, and make sure you understand at least the basic concepts.
Watch a Khan Academy video before they all get taken down. You might want to try to find something new, like another way that you can try to ease the pain of reading these types of things.
Man, well, yeah, so I guess Khan Academy is out, but of course there are other methods.
Yes,
so
definitely.
It's very easy, I suppose, to read a research publication, but it's a lot harder to understand. So finding ways to do that, to make sure that you are up to date and comprehending everything that you read is very important.
Right. So, what are the aspects of a paper, Elena?
So there are a few stages that you go through while you're reading a research paper. The first stage is optimism. You need to, go into it thinking, this is great, I got this.
I'm going to have so much fun reading this paper.
I don't know about that. That's a little too optimistic.
No? Okay.
But you can, and then right after that, you're like, man, the fear's setting in, I don't know what to expect. And then right after that, you're like, honestly, I don't know why I chose to do this. I want to back out.
Talking yourself out of it. I don't actually need to read this.
Honestly, I don't need to know. This is too much information. And then you start figuring out these corner cutting aspects. You're like, so how do I do this? How do I understand without having to read it? You start trying to look at any way to get out of having to do this. Next, it's bafflement. You're looking at it like, what? Who wrote this?
What am I supposed to understand any of this?
Exactly.
At all?
Each sentence that you go through after that, you're like, this is absolutely crazy.
Exactly. That's one thing. Like we talked about in the last episode, there's so many just acronyms all over the place that it's if you don't understand what that acronym means, you're screwed.
But you can Google pretty quick. And some articles are super cool because at the bottom they give a list of all of their abbreviations and all that type of stuff that they use.
Right.
And then after that comes distraction. So as you read, your mind starts skipping around.
Wandering, looking outside, just wondering all the things you could be doing.
Looking for any reason at all to escape your current situation.
Right.
That's the part that always gets me.
Yeah.
I usually kind of give up after that, but...
Don't.
Just
don't be like Alina.
Oh. I mean, he's right. But... Okay, and then after that, you realize about 15 minutes gone by and you've been reading the same sentence over and over again. But now you're determined, right? So you've already wasted all this time and now you're saying, we're going to do this.
Right, we're ready. Let's actually read the paper.
Yeah, now I'm going to actually get this done.
Now we really kind of have to.
And then a few minutes pass after that and now you're mad. You're like, who wrote this? Why?
Can't you find a better way to write this paper? Exactly. Please.
Where are all the smaller words that mean the same exact thing?
Exactly. That's one grief I always have with these types of papers, is that they try to be as intricate and in-depth as possible, where sometimes just give me your point.
Exactly.
Tell me what you're trying to tell me, and don't try to confuse me on the way.
Get it out. Just get it out as quick as possible, simply.
Please.
And then the last stage, where you really start to contemplate if this is the career for you.
Deciding, should I have become a psychology major too?
Oh, really? You're gonna come for psychologists like that?
Yo, come on. Most of the people that decide that they don't want to do biology, they're always like, psychology's the way to go.
Man, you better put some respect on their name.
Oh no, I love psychology.
We just opened our paper. Bear with me as I try to read this title, okay? So, we found it in the Journal of Immunology. It's called TNF-alpha-Induced Sphingosine 1-Phosphate Inhibits Apoptosis.
Phosphatidylinositol.
3-kinase, AKT pathway, and Human Hepatocytes.
That's long and intimidating, if you ask me.
So, what do?
The first thing that we always look at is we kind of look at the authors and all that kind of stuff. We want to make sure that these authors are going to be credible, but like we talked about in the last episode, this is the Journal of Immunology. You think they're going to publish a paper that is not credible? No.
Exactly.
So in some other cases, if you are not on a site that would be credible inherently, you might need to look at that. But we trust the Journal of Immunology, so we're going to move on.
Yeah, don't do extra work. Just, if you found the paper,
Right.
if it's from a credible site, don't do extra work, take it for what it is, and move on.
Right, and so the first thing that you kind of see whenever you look at the paper, right underneath the title, you see the abstract. And a lot of people decide to read this, and sometimes it's a good idea, sometimes it's not. Because you can read the first few sentences, and I'm already lost. There are so many acronyms and things that I just don't know. Yeah. So what should I do instead of reading the abstract first?
I would jump right into the intro. So the intro is going to have all of the background. It's going to have all of the reason why the authors themselves decided to even do the experiment or the project or the study anyways.
So like in this specific paper, the first part of the title is TNF-alpha-induced. The abstract has nowhere in it what that means. But the first sentence of the introduction is tumor necrosis factor alpha. Within the first sentence of the introduction, I already understand something more than I did the moment before.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the reasons we read the introduction first, is it's going to actually teach you what you need to know, rather than just expect that you know it.
So this isn't to contradict what we said in episode 10, because in episode 10 we said to just read the abstract. It'll give you everything you need to know to decide if you need to continue reading that paper. But honestly, to read the intro is to decide, after you've already read the abstract, that it has the pieces, the little puzzle pieces that you need to decide that you even want to read it, and it has the information that you want to have.
It's basically like, this is the part where you are going to be learning and understanding, rather than just getting a bunch of acronyms thrown in your face that you don't understand. The introduction is going to be that thing that gets you in the mindset to be able to read this paper.
Now we're going to move on to the materials and methods portion.
Mm-hmm. And just keep in mind that a lot of these papers, they set them up in very different ways. So you're not going to always have the introduction and then we go into methods. Sometimes they will actually go right into the discussion, right into the meat of the paper, and they'll just tell you the methods later. Because a lot of times, people don't want to know how you did the experiment, they want to know what you got from the experiment.
Yeah, the results are going to be the most important part at some points, but if they read the results and they have questions, going back to the methodology of the paper is going to be extremely helpful.
Right.
And I would recommend this if you are using a research paper for literature review or for whatever your purpose is. Sometimes it is great to understand exactly how they got the results that they received.
Right, and sometimes in some cases, you want to know how they did the experiment, because then you can look at that experiment and understand if they made mistakes inside that experiment. If they didn't account for some kind of bias or some kind of other variable, it's in the methods, and they might be able to either tell you why they did that, or you can make your own decision.
And this speaks largely to thinking critically as you read. Just because it's in a paper doesn't mean that every single detail of it is going to be trusted without any type of questions.
Right. The person is publishing this research because they see value. That's not to say that it is always going to be correct.
And you just need to take it without questioning. That's not always what it means.
Exactly. So the methods section is usually what they actually did. So in this paper, they made cell cultures. They did a Western blot. They were measuring the activity of these specific proteins. And all of those things are going to be discussed in detail in the methods section.
And this would be a great time to look for your controls, to look for the different variables, to look for measurements and time constraints and things like that.
And so this methods section is not going to tell you the results at all. It is specifically for what they did, why they did it, and if you decided that you wanted to redo this experiment sometime, that's where you would look.
Absolutely, and that's a very critical part, because you want to be able to replicate data. Data means nothing if it can't be replicated.
Exactly.
Due to the methodology, whatever they chose to do in the experiment, that gives you the results section. So now moving on here to the results section, this can get a little confusing sometimes because it's interpreting the data that they received from doing the experiments in the second section.
And sometimes this results section isn't even explained at all. Sometimes they will just give you the data that they obtained and just leave it up to you, or they have a separate section called the discussion, where they will actually take the data that they found and explain it in the way that they understood it. And that's one of the big deals about these research papers. Just because this researcher says this is the reason something happened does not mean that that is 100% correct. You could read the research paper and the results and make your own assumptions, and they could be correct as well.
Yeah, so just because it's not being said doesn't mean that it's not true.
Right.
Something I wanted to mention as well is this is where you're going to find all of your data in a visual representation. So you're going to see your graphs, you're going to see your figures and your tables. And these can be confusing as well, especially if you're not accustomed to looking at data presented in this form. To explain the data section a little better, look at the captions. So each graph or table or figure will have a caption. So in these captions, they're going to explain word for word what's going on in the picture.
I'm looking through, I see a lot of Western blots. I see some activity assays, which they're using bar graphs to determine that.
Some things to pay attention to when you're looking at data is going to be your independent variable and your dependent variable. Here in figure 4, graph A, you have the incubation time and the percent of control that was used in that experiment. They have a line graph in that one. And then figure 4A2, you're going to see a bar graph. So each of these are giving you the same data in different formats because the different types of presentation give you different aspects of the same data, which is very important sometimes.
And one of the most important things here that I feel like a lot of people forget about is the control. You are always going, anytime you see results like this, you need to be comparing your control to the other information that we got. Because the only way that we can decide if something is significant or not is if we base it on another measurement. So in all of these graphs that Lena's talking about, there is a control. At A2 on figure 4, the C right there, that's the control. And all of them are going to have it.
Absolutely. And be sure to pay attention to your units. Looking here at micromolars, that's a lot different than if it was just molars. And then here for the control, they're describing that in percentage. If you thought that it was also micromolars, that might be a little confusing. So just pay attention to those little details because that can be huge.
Right, so the big point that we want to make in this results section is look at everything and understand it, and don't move on until you can explain what the graph says. Because
that could be true for any aspect of this paper,
That's true. They're giving you a lot of pictures and a lot of graphs to be able to describe all of the data that they obtained.
Absolutely. After you look at the data presented and you understand how they got their results, because that's the biggest point of looking at an experiment study design, is to understand how they got their results and what the results were, right? So after that, you move into the discussion.
Right, and the discussion sometimes, like we said earlier, is just how the researchers are looking at this data and deciding what they think it means. You can make your own distinctions on things. If there's a reasoning that you found for whatever problem that they're talking about, in this case it's the NFF-alpha, if there's something that you think, that's not wrong. You have your own idea and that's okay.
So none of these sections, as we described them, the intro, the methodology, the results, discussion, conclusion, those don't have to be in order. They don't have to be titled. They don't have to be specific in any ways. But you should understand what makes each one of these sections that section. That way you don't need a title.
Right. A lot of times you won't have all of these parts of a paper. A abstract, introduction, methods, results, discussion, conclusion, which is the normal parts of a paper. Like this paper that we're looking at right now does not have a conclusion. At least it doesn't specify a specific section known as the conclusion.
It depends 100% on the journal that paper is being published in. A scientist's job is to explain well to help other people understand. So when you see charts like this, where they're in I call them like a spider web, and so that makes it extremely easy to understand how all of the bits and pieces of this experiment fit together to get the results.
Like we said earlier, this does not necessarily have a conclusion, but a lot of times the conclusion, it's just trying to wrap everything up. It's trying to restate the point of what is going on in this paper and tell you what they think is causing this phenomena that they're researching.
It could also be a moment for the researchers to take a reflection and look back and think, oh, maybe we could have done this better, this is potential error, maybe this result will leave some questions because the data looks a little off. It's their time to explain any types of questions that reviewers might have.
Exactly.
And then to finish off is always that huge list of names at the end. That's our reference section.
Which is almost the most important section because you never want to plagiarize, obviously. And if you are ever finding yourself, you read this paper and they make a assumption or a conclusion that you don't agree with, maybe you should go to one of these references and read another paper, because the authors that wrote this paper wouldn't have used that research if they didn't agree with it in some way.
Yeah, and all throughout the paper, the numbers that the references are listed under, 1, 2, 3, etc., they're going to be in parentheses after a specific point. So here, for example, it says microinjected SIP-induced DNA synthesis in Swiss 3T3 cells, parentheses 43. So that parentheses 43 refers to the reference paper 43 at the end. You could just go straight to that paper and read a whole entire research paper on that one subject, probably, I would assume, describing what a 3T3 cell is.
If you want to read this one, Alina said the title earlier. It's pretty interesting, actually. I just hope that all of these tips that we've been using for you guys and like going through this is going to be helpful.
So I went a little out of my way to find this paper because it is really term heavy and it's kind of dense in the way of information. See that even though it's very dense and reading heavy, you don't have to know everything perfectly to be able to kind of comb through and get the gist and understand if you know what you're looking for and you know how to be prepared and how to just go for it. A lot of these research papers are results of years of hard work from dozens of scientists. So even this paper had 8 scientists working. It would be far-fetched to assume that you would understand all of these years of their work in one sitting, in one afternoon, in one bus ride. So go easy on yourself, take all the time you need to understand. I honestly suggest splitting it up into chunks and taking it day by day and maybe tackling a little bit at a time.
Get a strategy that makes sense for you and just get through the paper, persevere no matter what.
Thank you, Holden, for joining me. It's great to see you like always.
Oh, love this. Love recording the podcast, and I'm so proud of everything that you're doing.
Thank you. You too. I'm rooting for you. In the next episode of Symology, Evan Pierce, who's recently accepted into graduate school at UMKC this year, is going to be joining me again for episode 19, where we choose 8 different historical scientists and we talk about their life, their careers, their goals, and most importantly, how they furthered the field of whatever they were studying. Pretty excited about this discussion. I think it's important to acknowledge the work that has been done so that you can continue to be excited moving forward in the future of any scientific field. If you go ahead and share and subscribe, you can listen to this episode, any other episode that I have. You can also go ahead and send me any questions that you have and I can try to explain further. There were some unclear aspects of this episode. Email me at symologyysg@gmail.com. Reach out to me on our Facebook page, Instagram at the Symology Podcast, and on Twitter at symologyysg so I can introduce a little more content and answer some questions that you have. Thank you for listening to our 18th episode of Symology, a Young Scientist Survival Guide. Tune in with me, Alina Adams, for episode 19. See you next time.